Hi, my name is Victor Vines. I'm with Vines Architecture, and here today with me is my design partner, Bob Thomas, Jeff Schroeder, project manager, project designer, and Jolie Thomas, project designer on the project. So thank you for having us. I was going to come up here and say whoever moves to the front gets to register for a free iPad. But I don't have a free iPad to give you. So, but as Joel said, if you do feel comfortable, you can step up a little bit closer, and we'll try to make this stakeholder meeting a little more intimate. I'm going to go through the first part of the presentation and kind of share with you what our intentions are today. But before that, I'd like to, because it's such a small group, I'd like to just ask everyone, starting with this young man in the blue shirt, to go around and introduce yourself and who you are. So the agenda we're going to cover today in this session, we're going to share with you a little bit of introductions on our side beyond just Vines Architecture relative to the county management team for the project, and then our consultant team sort of more at large relative to others that will be working on the project with us. We'll give you some quick project background information, overview of the county library and its current status, and where we are in our process of program verification. And then we're going to jump quickly into probably the more important component of this, and that is an exercise where we're going to ask you to become involved and to basically give us any ideas or thoughts that you may have regarding the new library project and the transformation of it. Our process, which Bob will talk a little bit more about after me, is a very collaborative, very transparent one. We're at the stage of program verification from the 2009 program, and we see this as probably the most critical stage of the project, quite frankly. It's where we are establishing the parameters, the ground rules, the design goals, the vision for what one could argue one of the more important projects in downtown Durham that we're working on. So Jeff will lead you through that exercise as we start it, but we're hoping that you're going to not be bashful about your thoughts and ideas about the project. As I said, the meeting objectives is to share a little bit of background with you, and then once again, not so much on the details, but the visions that you have or foresee or input relative to the library. The executive team that we're working with from the library side is led by Perry Mans, which is the senior project manager with the county. Brenda Hayes Bright is the project manager that we're working with. Tammy Baggett, library director, along with Sandra Lovely, which is the assistant director, and Joel White, which is the library manager and the most enthusiastic library manager I've ever met and had the privilege of working with. So as I said, my name is Victor Vines, principal in charge on the project. Bob Thomas, design director, Jeff Schroeder, and Jolie Thomas as the other two project designers and managers that's leading this effort on our part. The extended consultant team consists of Stanford White as our MEP consultant, Stewart Engineering as our structural and culture, Joel Timms with Dan Jewell as our landscape and civil architect. The Sexton Group will be providing the IT and AV and telecommunications and security consulting. We have a specialty lighting consultant on the project, Light Defines Form, and then Harris Costs is our third-party cost estimator on the project. The reason we're most excited about this project is that one of our core markets is library design and expertise. We have completed several projects here in Durham through previous associations, myself and Jeff, which is the South Branch and the North Branch libraries, and then also we have recently completed the Northeast Library in Washington, D.C. It was a historic renovation preservation project that was just recently opened. Fortunately won a couple of AIA awards, Historic and Preservation Award, and a Design and Library Award as well. We've also had the privilege of working on the Anacostia Library and Tinley Library in DC as well, and currently have a 30,000 square foot library in Alpharetta, Georgia under construction. So we're very passionate about this building type. It's one that's very, very important, and so we're looking forward to bringing that expertise to your project. Also, sort of stepping back, we love working on what we considered public visitor-based projects, and we've done things everywhere from as small as 1,200 square feet, which was a wonderful little radio station renovation, to currently about 182,000 square foot student center, which is currently beginning construction over at North Carolina A&T State University. A lot of public sector work, a lot of cultural center projects, and so we enjoy these very, very much. The project background, most of you may know, in 2009 there was a program completed by the Smith Group for the design of the library. We have endorsed that program, generally speaking, but noticing obviously that it was done back in 2009, and here we are in 2015 starting the design of the project. So we have entered into a phase called the program verification, and that is essentially reviewing this document and making sure that it's in compliance for the design of a library for today. And part of what we're trying to do with the stakeholder meetings is making sure that we have confirmed our verification process with any thoughts or inputs that the various stakeholders are willing to share with us. And so we're probably, I would say, about 60–70% through the verification process, but clearly we don't want to do that absent of key stakeholders' input. So we're working toward finalizing the revision of that program. There will be an amendment created to it, and that would be presented to the county for approval prior to us starting schematic design. The project organization, generally speaking, is obviously the Durham County Library as the user, Durham County as the owner, and Vines Architecture as the architect of record, which is essentially creating the project leadership group. Informing that group as to what should happen with this very important project is the downtown community, clearly community leadership groups, the library staff, partner organizations, and the library users itself, along with the regulatory agencies local to Durham. And so all of these agencies and stakeholders and user groups inform what we consider to be a very sort of porous group when it comes to informing us really what should happen for the library. The project schedule, as we know it today, consists of, as I mentioned, the 2009 program study, us now verifying and updating that program as we understand it, and beginning the design process, which would be, which Bob will go through more in detail, but essentially schematic design beginning after the program verification is completed. We'll have some approvals along the way. There is a financing component to the project process, but fast forwarding, we see looking as a goal to have the closing of this library and construction beginning sometime in summer of 2017, and it taking about a year or so to do the construction, which has about a fall 2018 or a year and a half for the proposed library opening. These are sort of rough order of magnitude schedule milestones as we see them today. There may be some adjustments along the way, but generally speaking, this is the project schedule that we're proposing and moving toward. The library overview. Durham County's library is extremely rich with very, very strong programs. There is a great sense of creating a community of lifelong learners, and so those are sort of, I mean, it's a wonderful place to start relative to creating a facility, is to have those wonderful programs already in place and continuing to thrive. The mission of the downtown Durham Library is to encourage discovery, connect the community, and lead in literacy. And so we're looking for ways to support that mission through the project that we're going to be creating. I mentioned current status. There are several things that have changed since 2009, which once again has us involved in this process. One, there's new library leadership on board since 2009. The library trends in general today are very different than they were several years ago, and we want to make sure that this project captures those new trends, that we're not stagnant in what was discussed and thought about in 2009. And then more importantly, as you know, the technology has changed drastically since then, so we are essentially reviewing that entire component of the library program relative to not only today, but more importantly, what will actually be happening in the future when this library opens. And then clearly there have been changes in growth in downtown Durham and the community, and so we want to make sure that the document acknowledges that and embraces that as well. And Bob will talk a little bit about that relative to the site in the context of downtown Durham. I'll ask Bob to come over and once again give you a little bit more detail in our design process, so you'll understand sort of what happens after this phase. And then Jeff will talk about some of the library trends, and then we'll get into the exercise.
Thanks, Victor. Again, I'm Robert Thomas. I'm the Director of Design with Vines Architecture, and I'm going to share a little bit about the nature of our process. I think this audience is a little bit different than some of our others, and I think most of what we'll talk about on this slide you're probably well aware of. And we'll also share with you what is really at this point just some analysis and the identification of what we see as some issues and most importantly opportunities with the project. It's really the framework or the foundation upon which we'll begin the design process. So as Victor said, we're really in program verification and advanced planning, a verification of an existing document. This part of the process is very important. It's important for our process in particular in that I like to think it's inclusive, it's iterative, and it's very much about engaging with the constituents and the stakeholders. So before we even draw a line, it's important for us to really understand not only the library at the scale of the room, the program, what's going to be in it, but for the aspirations as well at the scale of the city as well. Libraries, more than most facilities, have really a transformative kind of ability to serve as a catalyst for urban reactivation. So the program verification is where we're at now. We're hopefully in the next month or so, we'll go before the county and have a approval of this amended program and then move into schematic design. As Victor said, the design process is about a year, roughly 3 months, 4 months, 5 or 6 months, with construction beginning after that. There's financing, obviously, that we have to work out. Construction a little bit over a year. So this will really be, it's a point of departure. It's the first time you'll see us, but not the last time. Again, we have a very inclusive, iterative process. So here we are in the beginning. We're really just listening and analyzing. We've spent a lot of time, thinking about the building from the inside out, in the city from the outside in. But again, dialogue and feedback, and what I think really differentiates our practice is we have a very rigorous kind of explorative process. So this feedback loop is something that is very important to us, and it begins with understanding and really helping to articulate the vision and working to translate that vision. We're not architects that we're very experienced in working on these projects in the public realm, but what is most important, what's really going to shape this, are these collectively defined ideals. So we're very good at helping to articulate with multiple constituents a collective vision for a project, and our strength as designers is really in the interpretation of what those principles are. So we're not a design firm that kind of retreats to our studio and then comes back to unveil, a vision. We're very much interpreting ideas that are defined, not by Vine's architecture, but really defined by the community. And it's a process, and this is where we are now. So although we're at the programming scale, we're really thinking about the project. We like to think of at the scale of the room. We're looking at what is in the building, what the sizes are, reconciling the scope. But just as important, and we do both of these in concert, understanding really the context and the site and the project at the scale of the city. So while we're working with the library staff to determine this part, it's critically important, in particular with an existing building, that we understand the relationship between these two components, and we're working at the scale, the urban scale, and then the scale of the room. So that's a very important distinction to make. It's not linear, it's a back and forth process. And this is something that we take very important as architects that are really passionate about working in the public realm. And then, of course, Victor mentioned this, we're working closely with Dan Jewell. He's an integral part of our team, but we know there's a upcoming update to the downtown master plan, the UDO. We're well aware of the open space plan, and it's important that we all here recognize some of the opportunities that the library project has. Although it is a renovation, there's a lot that we can do to really start to participate in really the renaissance in this kind of northeast end of Durham. So all of these guidelines are enormously important, not just as rules and regulations, but as something to really understand the spirit of and help to understand what the library can do to really, really participate in the redevelopment of Durham. So it's about building a library, but most importantly, it's really about connecting to the community, and that's something that we're really passionate about. So in all of this, these aren't really concepts yet, but some major themes are starting to develop in our conversations with the library leadership and some of the stakeholder groups. Of course, safe, secure, and welcoming. An urban library, this typically goes without saying, but it's a delicate balance in an urban context, and it's something that we're really working to explore with a really kind of wide range of library users, and how can we make sure that it is welcoming. Those have their urban implications with that. What can we do to take an insular building and make it a little bit more permeable and connected to the street? Encourage discovery and lifelong learning. Tammy spends a lot of time talking with us about some of the strategic goals of the library, and that is really to lead in literacy in the traditional sense, but most importantly, there's technological literacy, and then ultimately a civic literacy as well. How can we create real places and spaces to encourage people to engage in their community? We really, in this kind of virtual kind of society, we still need these real places to participate ultimately in a democracy. And then connectivity. This is kind of something that we're talking about really at a wide range of scales. Within the library itself, we spend a lot of time talking about that. We have this very kind of striated building, 3 discrete floors that are somewhat disconnected, multiple entries on 2 different floors. So how can we better connect the library and the programs within the library? And then some of what I alluded to in that early diagram at the urban scale, what can we do with what is a very somewhat institutional, introverted building? What are the things that we can do with the architecture to better engage the street and connect to the fabric of the city? So although it is a renovation project, this notion of connectivity and thinking beyond the footprint of the building and understanding addition or opportunities for addition, or what we can do with the envelope, to really understand how it participates in the urban fabric. So connectivity is a key theme at the scale of the library and at the scale of the city. It's a critical part of the master plan, the urban plan for downtown Durham. So this is something that we see as being a real driver as we start to think about the design. Along with that, the opportunity to really think about usable outdoor areas. How can we create really civic spaces in the landscape? These spaces that aren't residual spaces that are left over, but how can we create program spaces in the landscape? Technologically advanced and most importantly adaptable. It's a library for the future. We know that even when the library opens in 3 years, there'll be new technologies that we won't even be able to anticipate. So to understand that it has to be flexible. This is a library that needs to adapt. And then sustainability. I mean, that is something that's kind of part of the DNA of our practice as just a matter of course. I think we as a practice can't wait until this is something that's it's not talked about and everyone has a sustainability slide. It's just something that you have to do. So sustainability will be a key driver as well. And then most importantly, it's a library for Durham. We work with a lot of different library systems, and there are certain aspects of information that is becoming, of course, more universal, but really what differentiates libraries and library systems is how they're embedded in the community, how the community really informs the development of the program. There's a lot of, whether it's the history of the library itself, the very first public library in the state of North Carolina, that's an important thing. The cultural heritage of Durham, how can we help to tell that story? How can we kind of respond to the fabric and the vernacular of Durham, even though it is a renovation project? And then the programs, the unique programs and the people. Durham's library system has a very, very unique program. Some of you may not be aware of how special it is relative to some of the others. So unique programs that can really define unique program spaces. So this is something that's very important for us. How can we take these universal principles and really make and create a library that's about Durham? And then a little bit about the users. Of course, it's a somewhat decentralized system with the regional libraries. So in essence, in some ways, Maine has been talked about as a regional plus. But with that said, it's a very different library. It's not only, it still has some symbolic obligations, I think, to serve as a symbol or the flagship library. And then also it has a very different context. It's an urban context. The user group is a little bit more, the constituents are much more diverse. And then when you think about the location within the city, we're frankly quite excited about it. I know back in 2009 there was questions of whether or not it really needed to remain in this part of Durham, but just looking at this diagram and thinking about the opportunities for an urban library to really participate in a really, really broad section of Durham, I think this map is pretty telling. Here it sits at the seam. Yes, it's on the outskirts, kind of somewhat isolated by the loop, but to really kind of participate in the revitalization of downtown, the business community, new residents that are moving downtown, existing kind of single family fabric, and then just as important, as this new development and really the demographics of the downtown proper change, there's also a huge, I still think, an opportunity to continue to embrace the county and the social services, the urban ministries, and how do we make sure it's inclusive of all of this kind of broad cross-section of Durham. So this map, I think, is pretty telling and something that we take to heart, and that what makes this library site pretty unique. And then transportation, we obviously have, it's somewhat different than the other regionals in that, yes, it's car-based. I don't think the parking lot is going to go away anytime soon, but understanding the unique kind of access that this site has in an urban environment is something that's important to acknowledge, from the bus stop to some of the light rail discussions. So transportation and accessibility is something that differentiates this. Some excerpts that we really concurred with from the original plan or the 2009 plan, just the notion I touched on before, but connectivity back to downtown proper, some of the development opportunities, which at the time were called Parcel 1 and 2. Some of that has developed some obvious traction. And then a key driver that we concurred with too is the notion of the image and visibility, how this very important corner, Liberty and Roxborough, how is that edge different from perhaps this edge? What can we do to better engage the street and the sidewalk and the fabric of the city? Some other drivers, this is both a civic and an urban issue, and also a organizational issue at the scale of the library. But this notion of the two front doors, somewhat of a suburban kind of delivery or a suburban access model where it's primarily served by a parking lot with the kind of the grand civic entrance on the front. So I keep referring to this as that kind of suburban house dilemma, where you've got the symbolic kind of portico and entry on the front that no one really uses, and everyone's kind of sneaking in the back. So what can we do to have a little bit of both? The car isn't going to go anywhere. We need to provide access for parking, but what can we do to consolidate the entry and have a real kind of civic space that's active, engaged, a little bit more permeable? So this is something that we'll be working on quite a bit at the urban scale, and then the operational issues. Having it on two different floors for the library itself is somewhat problematic. It's difficult to staff. So this is a key issue that we really need to work to reconcile. This is very, very loose. This is just a sketch for us, but these are the starting to to really quantify some of these these local site forces and how they might help to define our thinking, not to design the building, but organize it. The site forces, this neighborhood connectivity. Is there anything we can do in the site, in the landscape, to foster a little bit more connectivity to the Cleveland Holloway neighborhood? Thinking about the Liberty streetscape and this corridor, and that vital connection to the city fabric to the east, and these vital social and community services, and then also the connectivity back to downtown proper. And we're well aware of a lot of the seems like kind of ongoing conversation about the nature of the loop, and it's kind of serving as a barrier between the two, whether or not Liberty Street is straightened out, development opportunities across the street. So it's very important for us as a design team to think about the site not as it exists now, but really how the community leaders, the city and the county leaders, envision this part of Durham really changing. So we really we're excited about the library participating in that and hopefully helping to drive and kind of continue. I don't want to say it's the catalyst, because some of this is already happening in this area, but of course, as a civic institution, the library can really participate in this revitalization of Durham. So this starts to suggest some of these architectural ideas of it being more permeable, more open. What can we do to rethink some of these interior civic spaces and understand how they relate to the city proper? So again, it's a renovation and small addition, but they're still very important kind of urban principles that we have to make sure we're aware of, and that it's working to reconcile all these really unique and diverse urban site forces. So with that, that's kind of the outside in picture, and Jeff's going to talk a little bit about the library planning. And it isn't linear. We haven't separated it in this way. We're thinking about the interior at the same time as we're doing the urban analysis. But he's going to talk a little bit about kind of library programs and how they're changing and how they relate to the city and new programs.
Okay. In thinking about the library, one of the important things, as sort of a baseline to understand, is that collections and the services that are in them is continuing to be developed and continuing to change. We know that the book is still a critical part of the library, but we also know it's being supplemented by things like electronic medium, and then the programs become a huge part of it. Durham County has some really fantastic programs and incredible amount of attendance at those. So that is really one of the key areas that we want to address in the design of the facility. We also see libraries of today kind of becoming more vibrant, spatially exciting. They're open, they're visible. But then there's also knowing that with that, there's noise that's associated with it, and that people still want their quiet spaces. So understanding it has to act in both ways, be open, but also be a place where people can come and study. There's also the notion of transparency and light. One of the issues with the building now is that it's very insular. There's windows, but they're more narrow. They don't really provide views or connectivity to the city, so looking for ways to open it up from both a visibility but also from an energy efficiency and lighting standpoint. And then along with that is the idea of organizational clarity and visibility in there. Right now when you come in, there's 2 front doors, there's a main stair that's in the middle that really serves as a barrier, so looking for ways to open it up so that when you come in you can easily find where you need to go, what you're looking for. And in contrast to that, you know, it's sort of this balance again of trying to create small spaces that people can come in and study, be by themselves. And so you again, it's a balance of the sort of big openness, the small spaces, and everything in between. Bob mentioned briefly, but technology is going to be critical, both for what's out there now, what's going to be here when this building opens, and what's going to happen 5 years from now. If you think about just technology over the since 2009, the iPad wasn't invented. So, I mean, in that little span of time, quite a bit has happened. And then along with that is the idea of being connected from social media, you know, computers, conferencing. So really providing opportunities for those things to happen to serve the community in different ways. Now, we talked briefly about programs, but just understanding that they're there, and so there needs to be spaces for those to happen. New program spaces for new technologies, for new programs the library wants to offer in the future will all be critical going forward. And one of the critical parts of the library is going to be the flexibility and the sort of the ability for it to have multiple activities happening at the same time. The last thing we want is a space that's going to be used once or twice a week. We want to find ways for the whole building to be used as much as possible, so that if there's a meeting room like this, when there's not a presentation, how can it serve something? Is there ways that it can open up and be study rooms, to be meeting rooms, to be conference areas? So really finding ways to maximize the space within the building. And in the end, you know, it's all about serving everyone. It's serving different learning styles, different users, different demographics. It seems like there's a lot of hotels being built downtown, so even the people that might be here for a day or two coming to use the library. So really, how can the library act in many, many different ways? So looking at that information and informing the new facility, again, we're in the very early stages of it, but there's a few things we've discussed and feel like are strong drivers. One is trying to get the adult collection on one floor. Right now it's scattered between the second and the third, and it's a little bit challenging from a staffing perspective, so we want to try and get that on one floor if we can. Consolidating the entry for just better staffing, better visibility, better security. And then, again, within there is just the idea of being able to see the space when you come in, that there's nothing that kind of provides barriers for programs, barriers for security, barriers for wayfinding. And so looking at some of the programmatic increases to this point, we know that the technology and the computers in the building is going to increase significantly. We also feel that there's a need for a larger meeting room based on the programs. There's several programs that currently can't happen at the library, so we want to make sure that whatever they have going on can happen here. And then providing more spaces for study, conference, and meeting. Right now, the spaces in the library are very, very minimal, so we want to look for spaces that might house 2, that might be more like a tutoring room, all the way up to a 10 to 12 person conference room, and everything in between, so really we can cater to a large group of people. Along with that, new program spaces we've discussed, notion of library cafes, maker spaces, literacy center. Again, these are just some of the things we've kicked around a little bit and have discussed, but we really want to hear from you on some of your ideas on what you feel is the best way to direct the program. And looking briefly at the collection, we see the number of items being about what it is now, but maybe a slight shift in how they're allocated. There's a huge amount of use of the children's collection right now, and a huge amount of use of the young adult, actually, so looking at possibly bumping those percentages up within the new building slightly. And so backing out and looking at what the building is now, as I mentioned earlier, the adult is a large part of the building. It's basically a floor and a half. The staff and friends is another large element because it's housing space for the whole system as well as this branch. And then the public area becomes a large entity because of the 2 entries and sort of the space associated with that. So going forward, just from a percentages standpoint, we see the adult going down a little bit in terms of the percentage of space that it occupies, but really adding to meeting and program spaces, the study rooms, the tutor rooms, the conference rooms, and then increasing the children's, increasing the teen, a slight increase in the North Carolina room, and then trying to drop the general public areas down a little bit to get more into the program spaces. The core and the staff and friends of the library areas, we feel like from a percentage of the building will be about where they are now. And so all this yields a building of what we have here plus something else. We don't know exactly what that size is yet. We're working to define it based upon sort of the program input and looking at sort of how things get allocated within there. But we do feel like there's going to be an addition of some kind onto the facility. And so now what we want to do is hear from you guys a little bit. We have a series of boards around the room, which hopefully most of you saw when you came in. But these are designed to stimulate ideas, conversation, and a chance for you guys to really comment and provide input to what you see as the issues and sort of how they can be addressed and the best way to help drive the library going forward.
Looking at where we can add keys to the pie. Can we just add this down here? We're putting it here.
Well, they're ready to get more space for friends, but we need to, like, president for book sales. Yeah.
Just had a quick question. I don't know if you're this far along in the programming stage or not, but wondering if you're thinking one-story building addition, two-story building addition, rough number, square footage, adding on the front, adding on the back. Is everything sort of up for grabs at this point?
I think at this point everything is kind of up in the air. We're still trying to figure out what that area is. We know it's something, just based on looking at the programs, looking at the collection, looking at the staffing needs, and kind of the way that the space is used now. But I don't think we know if it's going to be up, out, large, small. We're still working through that, and it'll probably be sometime over the next few months that we'll have a better sense of what that is.
Yeah. Yeah, I always saw everything was really in the planning stages. And, everything can be one way or the other, just a thought. But it can be put in action. They sound good, and everything sounds good, and everything can be questionable. But it sounds good at this point. Yeah.
Yes.
I'm curious, is there any possibility of reintroducing Queen Street through the parking lot to create better connectivity from Student Holloway where I live down to Liberty Street?
At this point, we're working, we've heard that mentioned before. I think Dan brought it up. It's something that I don't know if we have a clear position on yet. I mean, clearly that connectivity between north and south is something that is critically important. Do you have specific thoughts on that? I'm guessing you're an advocate
Yeah,
for
I mean,
that.
I live in the neighborhood.
Yeah.
It's difficult to get from here to there, or if I were to go to the library and then need to go somewhere else,
Yeah.
it just complicates things in a way that doesn't seem necessary.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, really, you're talking about both pedestrian and vehicular
Yeah.
connection, right? Kind of one and the same, yeah. This site in general has a number of, we were talking to some of the transportation guys, but this particular part of Durham, we've thought a lot about that east-west connectivity, independent of what happens with the loop, but a lot of the one-way traffic and some of the spaghetti of roads. But I think that is a good point, and we are aware conceptually of that need for that connectivity and the graining from north to south as well.
It also makes car backup there
Yeah.
during the end of the day, which makes it difficult as a pedestrian if I'm not going to the library to get through there because how the cars have to.
Yeah. Do you walk to the library ever from that?
Always.
From that, yeah.
That's how I usually get to the library unless I'm voting and need to go somewhere.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, I mean, this is maybe not to shift the conversation in another direction, but that's another thing that we spent a lot of time talking about as well when we thinking about that Liberty and Roxborough corner and the importance of that as the civic address. But while recognizing, you know, it really is a library that doesn't have a front door necessarily. There still are, I mean, there's a reason that there are those two doors, but how can we have better pedestrian connectivity? If we do move it out toward that more civic prominence, what can we do to better connect to the sidewalks and the fabric and to not have to cut across a parking lot? I mean, a grade change as well. You know, is there anything we can do in the landscape to better facilitate that kind of movement from the neighborhoods up to the civic plazas or whatever they may be?
It's not friendly right now, and now
Yes.
I'm walking my small child through there, which is.
Yeah, I mean, really on any of the edges, it's an issue. So you can draw these diagrams of connectivity, and there's some real serious considerations that we'll have to give to the streetscapes. I know there's been a lot of talk about on-street parking at the scale of the city and some of the things that can do for traffic calming. But yes, all of the kind of these transportation issues and the pedestrian and the sidewalk and all of these urban issues are really critically important. The connectivity to the neighborhood is something that we're really, really interested in being a driver for what we do on the site.
I guess to the question, what do you consider the front of the building? How do you define the front, and does it have a back?
I don't think it really has a back necessarily, but in some ways I think maybe it's not useful to have a front and a back, or think of it as having a front and a back, in that there still is going to be the parking lot in the back. But it might be better, I think whether it's front or back, I think what we're trying to do is figure out a way for it to happen in one spot, and at this point it is preferencing kind of the Liberty Street side in that it would kind of connect back to the parking in the neighborhood and the Roxborough. So it's those two corners. Obviously it's not going to happen at the corner, but it's one of those two sides. But the challenge, I mean, back to his point about the connectivity to the neighborhood, how do we acknowledge that it still is going to have, it's an urban library, it's not, you know, standing back with a clear front facing the street. So how can it be a little bit of both? So what we've tried to do is think about consolidating it in one spot with connectivity from both the front and the back. But we're hesitant to think of a front and a back. But in the end, I see it being, and we've talked about it as a design team, the programming team from before had reached some of these conclusions as well, but acknowledging those two important bases, Liberty Street and the opportunities to connect out to hopefully a re-envisioned streetscape, and then Roxborough as well.
It really is unique. I mean, as Bob said, I mean, we're going to have one front door, but we're not going to get rid of people accessing the site from many different ways. So it's really going to be about getting a clarity of coming to the site. Once you're on the site, how do you get to the entry, and sort of understanding the whole process coming from the various parts of downtown. I think will be real critical in terms of the success of the project.
And
Not only access to the facility, but I probably want people to see the facility.
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I think that's important, how you view it,
Exactly.
whether or not you enter the facility.
Yeah, and that's something that in that one slide where we talked about visibility and what can we do at the civic or urban scale to make the building more permeable and put on display some of the activity in the library to the city proper. I mean, Roxborough is a pretty important artery. You know, what can we do to better connect to the fabric visually as well?
I think it is exciting that you are being very open, and even when the people wrote on the signs that they're very inclusive of all the people who use the library, including those who come from the shelter across the street. And just a few observations that we do have a lot of people in the shelter that love to read, and we put books up in the cafe, and they go like crazy. So it is great to have spaces for reading. For the computers, we do have people that use the computers, but unless we have spaces where people can use them along with a mentor or a tutor, oftentimes the computers are used for movie watching as opposed to for some of the more constructive things we would like, because people don't always know how to use them. So just think about how you incorporate some teaching space along with the computer space.
That's a great point. And we've spent a lot of time talking about that very thing conceptually. Typically what you'll see is, you know, a space for computers, you know, the traditional kind of computer lab and array of, which you'll still have that, but how can we better kind of diffuse that throughout the library? I mean, we're not tethered to cords anymore. You know, how can it inform, you know, one-on-one kind of job skills interaction or tutoring? Or
Right.
we talked a lot about digital literacy. You know, it's kind of naive to think that everyone, you know, knows how to use this technology, and how can we really kind of use it to engage on a kind of a teaching and a literacy level, and it isn't just,
Yeah.
it'll always be the kind of entertainment component as well, but how do you make sure that the computers and technology are inform some of these other
Right.
educational spaces?
And along with the notion of computer literacy and using it as a teaching, to not put the staff too far away
Yeah.
from the computer centers
Yeah.
and light.
Yes.
Just open it up. It just feels
It's too,
it's
yeah.
too easy to hide.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really key architectural driver, this kind of notion of, we talked about connectivity within the building. It's important on a number of levels. The security standpoint is one, you know, that how do you have visibility, how do you have a more central kind of control point in access. Architecturally, right now we talked a lot about its kind of striation, the opaque stair in the middle, you know, it really kind of chops it up and compartmentalizes. It's very confusing. So it helps with wayfinding, you know, what can we do to open it up to have a better legibility of how the library, people should be able to understand, you know, and it ties into the entry. When you come in, you should be able to understand intuitively how the building is organized. We approach projects not with signage and wayfinding, but just that intuitive sense of understanding how a building works and operates from inside and even from outside. So we talk about that as kind of legibility of the architecture in the building, and that's something that this library is really seriously lacking. I mean, there's not identity of different spaces. So that's, I think, a good point when you talk about opening it up and introducing light. And so that's that connectivity. Yes, yes,
I
security.
mean, just that it's a place for everyone
Yeah,
to
yeah.
come and use, not to come and hide and think
Yeah.
they don't want people to
Yeah.
And that's one of the things we've seen in a lot of projects is that when you open up the exterior, you get more visibility out to the site, as well as opening up the interior and getting more visibility within. There's just something that happens naturally with the security.
Yeah.
Most of the times people don't like to, when they're doing something wrong, most of the times people don't like to be seen. So when you can kind of get some internal, you kind of use it like a self-policing in a way that, you know, people are able to see what's going on around them. So if there's something going on that they see, they can alert a staff member, or a staff member can be there seeing better kind of what's happening in the far corners as well as close to them. So visibility, security, natural light, connection to the outside will all be very, very critical in terms of.
One more thing, I just think the whole project of making it more vibrant, and clean, and new is going to help. And one of the things I was talking to Rob that he helped us to do was to do some just environmental changes at the shelter across the street. And it's interesting that it takes people's expectations of how they're going to behave kind of up a notch.
Yeah.
Because the space is new and different and inviting. So I'm going to act new and different.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's a very good, I mean, it comes down to that notion of civic pride in a way too. You know, your environment informs and influences how, like you were saying, how you act and behave, and it's really a critical component. And there's a lot of studies in behavioral science that kind of reinforces that, your environment. So to work towards the kind of the aspirations of these kind of civic spaces, it really informs, it affects security. These civic spaces that are really active and vibrant, as Jeff said, they start to police themselves in a way, you know, if they are visible and connected and active. And so that's what we're really excited about with this particular site, and that we not be limited in our thinking about some of the issues that this site has had historically in the past. And I think that really, when this thing is kind of re-energized and kind of reimagined and hopefully more vibrant at that civic scale, it'll kind of in some ways help to kind of police itself.
Patrice, just to kind of dovetail in your point about the collaborative computer spaces, I think that's something that we will definitely have to input in your all's design, because right now we have the computers designed as almost like a one-person station, but of course our users make what they need. So they bring the other chairs from other areas to put beside the person when they're working collaboratively. So that's definitely something we'll have to consider. You guys will have to consider with the design.
I just want to say this, I think this space where we're sitting right now is really important. The auditorium here, and you know, I've just been in countless excellent programs here and had goosebumps, you know, just so inspiring. And I think that having a space that reflects that is pretty critical. And you know, I don't think there are that many places that so many people come together from the community, and they do at the library. And I would like to see in those programs even being more accessible for the rest of the people who are in the library to use the library for other reasons. Yeah. Especially as we have newcomers coming to the area so quickly. I'm in particularly thinking of the history humanities programs. How do we get those people to attend these programs, connected to the history, talk about civic literacy, literate on what has happened here in the past? At the History Museum, we also use the North Carolina collection. They're an amazing resource, but I think as a citizen, you know, of Durham, this space and the programs that happen here are just excellent. So.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I mean, that's really what, I mean, these spaces have always existed in a library, but you think of historically what libraries were. There was kind of a fundamental or primary importance placed on the book and the collections. That is still there, it's still important, but the big differentiator now are, I mean, libraries really now are community centers, these democratic spaces, they're for all. So these are more important than ever, and it's not just the size. We've identified the size needing to grow, but symbolically they need to feel important. You talked about connectivity and visibility, what we could do to make these rooms not so insular as well. You know, could we put the activities on display? You know, can you see that those are the things that attract people, you know, the things that you understand, you maybe didn't come to the library to participate in, but you're exposed to it. What we could do for, you know, walls to go away, to spill out, you know, into a garden space or into the site. So these program spaces really, really are key aspects of contemporary libraries, more so than they've ever been, and they need to really act in a lot of different ways. It's not just this, it's musical performances and everything. So I think that's a really good point.
I mean, in terms of the collection, to respond, I know the library has a book collection, but also an oral history collection, and so it does all start to kind of expand beyond books. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think, you know, right now we're sort of seeing this space. I think right now it seats about 150. We're sort of thinking 300 to accommodate what the library has going on now, but ideally we want this to be, we want to be able to house, you know, 500 or 600 people if they come to an event somehow. You know, we don't know exactly what it's going to be, whether it's kind of a room that allows it to spill out and they can kind of spill into the library should they have an overflow crowd. But you know, the last thing we want is when this thing opens, that you come in here and you got a program and you've got to turn people away again day one. So we want to make sure that we design for the future, that this is a critical part of it. And looking at just what Durham County does in terms of programs, I mean, they're off the chart compared with what all the other libraries are doing across the state. I mean, the number of programs they have here, the program attendance is very, very high. So we know that's a significant part of the building. It's going to need to be significant. This, as well as the other meeting spaces.
I think the population of Wake County is 66% greater. I think the attendance of programs in Durham County are maybe 4 times as great as they are the population, 3 times the size of whatever it is.
It's very important to have a plan. Maybe everybody may not agree on this here and that and the other. But the word revitalization and revitalization of a community or somebody want to move forward, old project to a new project. There's nothing wrong with that. They're having a base plan. You know, it may not be all in the works right then and there, but it's good to have a backup plan on anything. And we as people can have a plan and do basically do the streamline of what we want to do. Does it have a one phase, or does this construction have a one phase, two phase, or three, or and then
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, some of what we're doing now is to do just that, kind of reconcile what we call as architects, reconciling the scope with the budget, making sure the aspirations are in line with, you know, we're dreaming big, but we've got real parameters to work with, and that's part of this kind of strategic plan right now, that we identify a path to success and we prioritize these visionary components, and that's some of what we're doing now. It's kind of the wish list, but we're establishing priorities to really, that we can all agree that maybe not in its entirety, as you said, we're not going to agree with everything, but we have a strategy to move forward, independent of, I mean, there's financing that we still have to go through, and so yeah, that's a good point.
As a community, we have a recent focus on disconnected youth, and especially youth between the ages of 15 and 21, 22, 25. And I hope that as you guys are planning, you'll come up with something creative to engage that community in the library. And I don't think it's the collection. I don't think it's coming down here for books. I think it's coming down here for project work, maker spaces, and film projects that they can utilize together, that collaborative learning space for teens that would be really important in this community and absent now, I think.
And that's one of the things that we really do see. The teen area is really a focus of the library and something that needs to be addressed. And I think some of the things that we've seen happen is that it's a space for them that's visible, that's secure, but that's also their own. That they can come in here and use the library the way that they want. That it has technology for them. It has programs that they're interested in. It has collections they're interested in, and it also has the ability for them to kind of define it themselves. I mean, we've done a lot with furniture that kind of allows them to move it around and kind of arrange it and make group sessions, make individual sessions, but really knowing that the teen, that's a really significant age, and also partnering with other services around here to kind of support them as well.
Yeah, one thing that we have already had a successful grant application and project with STEM, which has been targeted toward the group that you're referencing there. So one plan that Tammy is envisioning is extending that to STEAM, which would incorporate the arts as well, and have a dedicated programming space for that. So, did you want to elaborate? Yeah, basically, it's still an informative process, but that's one possibility for the expanded space needs. That's what we're thinking. So much.
Thank you. One question I had, when you showed the initial layout of basically this building and the square footage available, and the comment that there's a big block of space in this, it's for staff, offices, including central staff for the system rather than specifically linked to this building. Mentioning you've got a limited budget on a program, ultimately no matter how big that budget is this site specific things necessary to stay in this building as you move forward? Can the central organization, I don't know how much of that square footage they take up, is that something that can happen elsewhere to get more programmatical space within your budget, for example?
I think this is a good one for Tammy to answer. She's got some specific thoughts on the central staff.
We've had discussions and still having discussions about if library administration would be housed outside of the actual building. I'm still pondering that. I'm not in favor of administration being in a different building because it really causes a disconnect between frontline staff and administration. Because no matter how hard you say, I'm going to get over there, you just don't experience the library in the same way. So I really need to give it more thought to make sure that we're not trading that off for needed space. So it is something that's on the table right now.
a little bit of a response to that is, if the central administration's here, that's already true for all the branch libraries, and maybe the central administration to a degree should be among all the branches. Or else in a separate location, all the square footage the county owns anyway. Service space can be used for programmatic purposes, and make the effort to visit, just as you would to the North Durham Library or the South Library or whatever it might be, rather than being in a particular branch.
Yeah, it really is a good point that you bring up, and one, like I said, I really have to give more thought to, because there is a difference in visiting a location and being in the location and experiencing it every day. But I definitely hear what you're saying, and those conversations will continue so we can determine what's best for the system as a whole with that. So I appreciate that point.
The maker spaces came up, and I just wanted to comment that one of the things that has been very successful for the museum is utilizing the sort of creativity and intellectual capital in our area. We just have such a creative community towards what we do on a small budget. And so I don't know if there is a tie-in there just in terms of giving people the tools, makerspace, giving people the tools to be even more creative, because it does seem to me, of all the places that I've lived, this community is exceptionally creative, including our teens and young people, and but all the way on up. So.
Yeah, I think that it is very important. I mean, to recognize some of what's happening in the Triangle and some of the innovation, like right in our backyard, and make sure that we are providing those resources for that to happen. And this is another really key thing that differentiates an old model of a library versus a new model. And the old model was more about, I hesitate to use this word, but consuming information. You're a consumer of information, and the new model is places more emphasis on the creation of content. So we're not just absorbing content, but we're creating and sharing and innovating. So that's a big thing that differentiates us, is to make sure the tools and the space that we can incubate businesses and share ideas. And so it kind of goes back to our discussion about this room. But again, creating content and providing the tools in the space to really participate in all of the innovation that's happening in really in Durham, the arts and science.
And then that innovation becomes in part the library's innovation, instead of sort of standing tangential to some of those things happening outside.
Yeah. So those maker spaces are symbolic as much as they are just providing new technology. It's really kind of about creating and participating in this innovation, not being kind of a bystander.
We'd like to try out the 3D printers.
Yeah.